Hi, welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and it's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've done one of these by myself. It's been a minute since I've put out an episode, but things have been going on in my life, and I figured this is a great opportunity to share what's been going on and how I've been dealing with it. And hopefully, if you're someone who's going through it right now, you can take something away from this episode. That's really the only purpose I'm making this. I don't want to go into crazy detail, but I had quite the OCD episode over the past month, and there's some things in there that I want to talk about. So, we all have different things that happen in our lives, and it's a part of life. As we go, things kind of just happen out of the blue. And that's what happened with me. As always, this is not a substitute for professional medical advice. I am not a therapist. I am not a medical professional. I am simply someone who has OCD and is sharing his truth, as well as giving others a platform to talk about their experiences as well. As always, if you are struggling, please seek advice from a mental health professional. So, in between the last episode and this one, I was dealing with some family trauma. And let me explain. My dad was injured and ended up in the hospital for a week. And so that was the catalyst for my OCD coming out to play. I was working on a Zoom call, and my father he's very stubborn in the most loving way. Like this is a man who at 61 still thinks that he's 30 and loves to do things, loves to work, loves to be outside. And so we've had this like red cardinal hanging out, coming to the door, really just random. My dad had the idea to get a bird feeder and hang it up in the front lawn so that this cardinal could get some food. While I was in my Zoom meeting, he went to go hang the bird feeder. And so, unbeknownst to me, he was out there on a ladder. Picture this, okay? The tree is probably 25 feet high. And he's using an A-frame ladder that can go to like 30 feet. But the tree is on grass. So no matter what, you should never step on a ladder on grass because it's uneven ground. That's a no-no. So he went on the ladder, put the bird feeder up, then he stepped down and was like, oh, it looks great, but it could be better. So he goes back on the ladder to tweak a few things, and he went to the top of the step. It wasn't 30 feet. You can fold this ladder. It's like one of those safe A-frame ladders that are adjustable. He was up probably like 10 feet, and he felt the ladder give out underneath him. He hung onto a branch. The branch broke, and the ladder landed as an A on the grass. He landed perpendicular on top of the ladder. So he let out this blood-curdling scream. I was in the house when it happened. When I heard something very faint, but I was in my head, I'm in a meeting and I'm like, oh, it's probably the neighbors. So I didn't check until he runs in the house, and with like his hand holding his backside, his left backside, he's like screaming my name, trying to hold on to the cupboards, and then he eventually falls on all fours on the kitchen floor. He's screaming that he can't breathe. He thinks that he broke his back or he's punctured his lungs. I've never seen my dad in this much pain before, and my dad is a tough mother fudger. So my whole life he's been like Superman, and he's a retired police officer. This man has seen a lot of things. He's been through a lot of different things. So this man is no stranger to pain, physical and mental. So I called 911, got into the hospital. That was like I felt like I was out of my body. I ended up going up to the hospital with my mom to meet my dad. Luckily, he broke 5 ribs. Luckily, he didn't puncture anything. But they were going to send him to a trauma center at a different hospital. So they transferred him. We met him there. Turns out he had bleeding in the lung cavity that they had to drain. So they stuck a hole in his chest, drained the blood. After all is said and done, that was kind of the catalyst. He is okay, thankfully. It could have been so much worse, and we are so thankful that he's okay. But I wanted to talk about the mental aspect of that, because many people, if you listen to this podcast or any podcast, when there's a host like myself talking about a mental illness, we sometimes have this like idea that people are cured or that they know all the answers. And I'm making this podcast to learn more, to create a platform where we talk about OCD in ways that inform, break down stigmas, and also can continue to keep conversations going, because this podcast is the one that I wish that I had as a 10-year-old. And I've learned so much since starting it, even though I've had it for most of my life. But I'm not someone who's cured. This is a chronic mental health condition. This is not something that you just get or have and then it goes away one day. And, to me, like the best way I can describe my OCD sometimes is it's like a sleeping wolf. When I'm good, the OCD is very minimal. Like I have a very good day-to-day life. I can manage it. It's great. And then when things, when shit hits the fan, it's really hard to deal with sometimes. Luckily, I have tools, right? Luckily, there's things that I have and understand now that I didn't 5 years ago. But I found myself really mentally exhausted during this week and having intrusive thought. I don't even want to go into the intrusive thoughts of what I was thinking, but I was having them left and right. I found myself kind of diving into that kind of thinking where it's, if I don't, like there was one instance, like the first night he was in the hospital, I was like, if I don't kiss my dad twice on each side of the head before I leave, like, X, Y, and Z. And I don't remember the last time that I was dealing with something like that. It was years ago. And so it was it was a reminder that, hey, it's still there. You just know how to deal with it better. It was tough. It was really tough. And I found myself kind of using the techniques and I mean, I've learned so much from my friends on Instagram and TikTok of other people with OCD, even like the guests that I've had on the show, the things that I've learned from them with their ERP experience and their OCD experience, like has been something that I can't tell you how thankful I am for. And going through the motions that week when my dad was in the hospital and seeing the things that I saw there, witnessing him in extreme agony, bawling his eyes out, unable to breathe, walk, sit, stand. It was horrifying. And on top of that, having the OCD wolf, if you will, come out to play. I just want to say thank you to the people who are on their platform sharing their story with OCD, because there's so much that I think I used that week. Like, this is the thing with me is, and I think I said this before, but when I was a kid and I had the house fire, I talk about this in episode 1. When I had the house fire, the night before, I said out loud that I hated the house and I hated my room and my bed. And so you can imagine as a 10-year-old, the next day when the house burns down, that stayed with me. So I was so afraid of my thoughts. I was so, like, the power that my thoughts had over me, and sometimes still do, is frightening. And so I spent most of my life never wanting to take the chance to go against what my thoughts were thinking, because I had, that experience, and it defined the rest of my life up to this point. So I felt so much resistance in the hospital when having those intrusive thoughts, the what ifs, the if I don't do this, this will happen. I felt so much resistance to actually let them be. I was getting involved with them. I was carrying out the compulsions. And there was one point, I think this was like day 3, I started to make that turn and started to make decisions to not carry out the compulsion. So if I would have the thought, like, you have to kiss dad on the head on each cheek before you leave, I started to just kiss him on one. And it was the hardest thing. It was so hard because I was like, do I really even want to take this chance by not carrying out the compulsions when this is just my thought process, and my thoughts were like, while my dad's in the hospital, do I really want to start fighting with OCD right now? Should I just let OCD go full rampant until he's better? And it's such a weird thing because I think that just goes to show how much strength OCD has over us sometimes, where it's like, oh, we'll just carry it out now and then later on it'll be better. But it doesn't get better, because throughout life we're going to have many different experiences and situations that are traumatic and they are hurtful and they are painful. And if you let OCD take over in this painful instance, the next one may be much harder to deal with until it completely starts to take over everything again. And I've been there where OCD takes over everything in my life, and I don't want to let it do that. So I started to push back on day 3, and it was hard. Like I said, it was really hard, but to see my dad suffer the way that he did. And if you've ever had a broken rib, I'm sure you can relate to the agony. I luckily have never had a broken rib. I don't know what it feels like, but he was describing that it felt like knives, like thousands of knives stabbing him in the stomach or in the back and the side. Every time he would breathe or laugh or pretty much talk. I mean, the first day he went to the hospital, he could barely talk. And my dad's a healthy man. My dad's a healthy 61-year-old man. And that shook my world too, because I feel like I always look at my dad through the lens of like my 10-year-old self. And like, I'm the age that my dad was when he had me. I'm 30. And I'm listening to my dad cry and wince in pain. And I'm like, shit, like, I know he's human, but damn, he's human. And that was very traumatic. And I just wanted to talk about that experience of really how OCD can go dormant, and that just because it comes back doesn't mean that it's going to be full-fledged you back in the mental hospital. That's not the case. I think that sometimes we look at that as a loss, and I did not look at this as a loss for me. I looked at it as an opportunity to deal with OCD in a different way this time in my life than I did with my last flare-up. In my last flare-up, like full-on flare-up, was 25 years. I was 25 years old, 26 years old. Then around that time, I had the existential OCD, but in between, it's very low key. It's still there. My contamination OCD is pretty a daily traveler with me. But when it goes full-fledged, those of you who have OCD, exactly what I'm talking about. So one of the harder parts too, we talk about letting go of thoughts. I made a mistake by going into the Ring camera to see if I could see my dad fall. And although I couldn't see him, I heard everything. I heard the scream, I heard the ladder give out, I heard the bang, and it was so traumatic to hear that. I just went, my mom saw me as I was listening to it. She saw me just go completely cold, fall to the floor, almost puked because of how just horrendous the sound was. And I couldn't stop replaying it in my brain. Like that was the only time I listened to the video. I will not listen to it again. But I could not stop replaying it in my brain. It just played all night that night. And I know logically that, hey, whatever you don't want to play, if you keep trying to fight it, it's going to continue playing stronger. So I had to go back to my practice of it's a thought. It's a painful thought, but it's a thought. And he is in no more danger now than he was 2 hours ago before you heard the video. Eventually it subsided and he's home now, thankfully, and I've been helping my mom take care of him. But I felt called to share this because I don't want anyone to ever think that just because I'm on this podcast that I started and hosting it and having people on, does it ever mean that I'm cured of OCD or that I'm in any position to say, hey, I did it, so can you. This is a chronic condition. And I think one of the things that brings us all together and why we're all so supportive and tight in this community is because we know it's a lifelong condition and that there are going to be highs and lows as we go through life with OCD, especially dealing with the traumas and the situations that everyone else eventually will have to deal with as well in their lives without the OCD. Like death, like rejection, like pain. It's something that we all have to go through on some level, shape, or form throughout our lives. And if OCD creeps up and becomes the wolf in those moments, it's okay. You're not at square one. I know much more at 30 with OCD than I did at 25, than I did at 20, than I did at 12. And if this happened to me 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to deal with it the way that I did this past month. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I love this podcast. I love the people that I've had on this podcast. I love the people I'm about to have on this podcast. And I love the people who are listening who want to understand OCD, not only in themselves, but within people they love. This is how we can help make it a little bit easier to deal with as people continue to learn about it in themselves. Thanks again, everybody who tuned in. I have a lot more I want to share here on the podcast, whether that's content, ideas, guests. As always, if you do have a question that you'd like to submit, please submit it on my website, www.pleaseexcusemyocd.com. And I will be answering questions again here on the podcast, which is something I started in the beginning and stopped, but I will be continuing to answer them here. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. Please excuse my OCD. Once again, thank you so much to anyone who has tuned in and listened this far. We'll see you soon.